All right, we're back. It's another Carolina podcast. Alabama in the rear view, Missouri coming up, and in a lot of ways, I think Carolina fans will finally start to get a clearer picture against a similarly matched opponent of what this Carolina team is going to end up looking like. It seems more and more like that North Carolina game was an aberration after two consecutive strong performances, one in an overwhelming win, one in a spread covering loss. But we have some more big picture thoughts on that. I hope y'all listen to Wes and Chris give their instant reactions on another Carolina podcast on Monday. We're going to give a few more big picture thoughts as we are now a couple days removed from the Alabama game, do a little bit of buy or sell, and then move into some preview for the Missouri game. But before we get into that, I want to remind you guys to rate, review, subscribe to the podcast, share it with your friends if you like it and you want us to continue doing it. That's the best way to support the podcast. And without further ado, Wes, Chris, welcome in. The Alabama game went, I think, a lot like people expected. I think by and large the expectations weren't that Carolina was going to win. People were cautiously optimistic that Carolina would cover the spread, as they did. People say it was on a late touchdown, but also the touchdown that initially was Alabama covering the spread was their backups. So, you kind of exchange garbage time touchdowns. But through 2.5 quarters, that was a legitimately competitive game. And now a couple days removed, do y'all have any other big picture thoughts that make you either more optimistic or more pessimistic about the overall performance from Carolina on Saturday?
I think that was a good question as far as what you take away from the game. And this is something that we've said several times already, but you don't take away too much from that Charleston Southern game because of the competition level. You can take away some things on sort of a micro level about, hey, Ryan Helinski looked really good. You take away a few different things, but in terms of the big picture, there wasn't a lot you could do with that game. I feel similarly about the Alabama game on the opposite side of the spectrum. I don't think you can look at it and say South Carolina can't compete with the other teams on the schedule. It was a horrible performance. Alabama lit them up on the back end, there's no doubt. 444 yards, 4 touchdowns for Tua. A lot of those on, to be quite honest, not to take anything away from his performance because he's great, but fairly easy throws. Henry Ruggs hitting 23 miles an hour on his 81-yard touchdown. I'm being serious.
I don't think I hit that driving to work this morning.
No, I mean, it is wild. But, we knew to some degree that Alabama was going to put up points and look good doing it and make South Carolina look not so good on defense in particular. And I think all of us picked, similar scores. Probably Alabama in the 40s. Or very high 30s, and then South Carolina somewhere in that 20 range. So, I just don't think you look at it. I think you consider that Alabama has one of the best receiving corps in the country, if not the best. They're different than Clemson. Those would probably be the top two. They're different types of receivers in Clemson, but they're just so good in space. They're so dynamic on offense, and defensively they got a lot of talent too. And South Carolina didn't play their best. Neither did Alabama. The Gamecocks missed some opportunities. And look, they're going to have to go on the road, play Missouri. They got a lot of challenges going forward, and they're going to have to play better than they did in week 1 going forward. They can't revert to that. So there were some good things, some bad things, but overall I don't think you can say this is the team's identity in the secondary or overall just based on that game.
I think a lot of attention and a lot of analysis has been paid to the positives coming out of the Alabama game, and rightfully so. I think there were more good things coming out of that game. Ryan Helinski looking at the very, very top end of what could reasonably have been expected for him. Rico Dowdle, really looks excellent. Looks like a completely different back than the last 2 years. Looks a lot more like the flashes we saw of him freshman year. A lot of attention has been paid to that, and like I said, rightfully so. But that's why I'm glad that you started where you did, Chris, because one of the things that I haven't been able to decide is how much of a problem is South Carolina's secondary and specifically the safety position, because there is obviously a lot of question, or there were obviously a lot of question marks about specifically tackling in the secondary after the North Carolina game. Against Charleston Southern, you don't really get to see a whole lot. And then against Alabama, you mentioned one of the best receiving corps in the country. I would say definitely the best receiving corps in the country. Arguably, y'all have watched more football than I have because y'all are a few years older than I am. But I think this is the greatest wide receiving corps I've ever seen in college football. Like the best wide receiving corps in the game of football right now, it's like Alabama, Clemson, and the New England Patriots, and like the Chiefs. So
yeah,
how much? Obviously, they had a game plan. They have the right personnel to expose all of those problems that Carolina has. But it doesn't mean that those problems don't exist. So how much is the safety position and, sort of that nickel position and sort of the rotation of those three guys outside of Mukwamu and Horn. How much of that is a legitimate issue going forward?
To me, I think you look more back at the North Carolina game to get and then pair that with what we saw against Bama, and then you go, yeah, this is an issue. I certainly think it's an issue, and Will Muschamp said the same. Some of it was Alabama's just really good. When Henry Ruggs gets the ball in space, if you give him room, you're probably not catching him. I mean, he's a sub 4.3 runner, and then you got Jalen Waddle and you got Jerry Jeudy and you got Devontae Smith was the one that, really tuned him up. He had, I think, 130, 160 yards, and he had 2 touchdowns, 8 catches. So he got to him also. You sort of pick your poison with those guys. They did a nice job, actually, on Jerry Jeudy in the game. He had 6 catches. 5 of them came after Bama went up, I think, 34-13. The game was out of hand. So
yeah, I think one of them, too, was on sort of one of those jet sweep pop passes, if I remember correctly. And Horn didn't follow him around the entire day, but he followed him around a good bit and did a really good job on him.
He did a good job on him. And JC, I believe, got beat on one of the Devontae Smith, I think, touchdown catches. But, look, you're defensive back. You play against Bama, you're getting beat some. There's no doubt about it. So I go back to the North Carolina game and then couple that with some of the things we saw against Bama. Some bad angles. We saw one play on the first Bama touchdown, sort of the little wheel route with the running back, and they lost a guy there. I think. Yeah. I think it was Jemias's guy. I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah, it was Najee Harris ran out of the backfield, and they ran like right past each other.
I think they were trying to disguise. They ran Jemias down sort of into the box, and then when Harris came around, there was nobody on him. They just lost him. I think they were in man coverage, and maybe Jemias was supposed to pick him up there. I'm not 100% sure. I don't know what the defensive call was, but there were some mental errors that were a little bit more alarming than, hey, you let one of these Bama receivers run by you. That's going to happen some. And then you pair that with North Carolina. There were some really good individual plays by North Carolina's receivers in that game, but I think just some of the issues that we saw pairing both those together are things that you can carry forward and be concerned about.
Wes, 3 days removed or 4 days removed now from the Alabama game, do you find your big picture takeaways are more of the same sort of general positivity that has been sort of the talking point for the last couple of days, or is there anything else, big picture, sort of a negative, a big concern? Because Carolina did lose by 23 points or 24 points going forward.
Yeah, I think that, as far as the question of how much is it about Alabama or how much is it, something where there's still big concerns. I think, maybe even the better question is how correctable are the issues that are still there. I look at that game and I say, yeah, a lot of it was because Alabama's receivers are so good. And, they play a true 4 wide. Like, they rather than sort of kind of adjusting to this pass first, spread it out, throw it around thing, to Saban's credit, he's leaned all the way into it. And, even as that game went along, when traditional Alabama, even the pass-happy Alabama, would have said, okay, we're up by 3 scores, we're going to sort of just salt this thing away, we're going to wear them down and basically make them surrender in the fourth quarter by running the football. They try to say somewhat more balance in the second half, I think, but still, when they needed plays, they were throwing the football. So, not just that they had 1 or 2 great receivers, it's that Alabama had 4 great receivers, and they put all 4 of them on the field at one time. And not everybody, but a lot of people online want to say, well, play man coverage, play man press coverage. Well, if they have 4 wide receivers on the field, you're trying to man up with those guys. You already have your nickel back matched up with a guy who's going to be faster than him. Now you have, depending on what coverage you're in, now you have a safety basically every single time because Carolina doesn't really play much true dime. You have a safety matched up with one of those guys, and if you're in cover 2 man, you have a linebacker matched up against one of those guys, which I don't think Carolina did much of that. But it's really one of those things where I think it was a terrible matchup for South Carolina. There are concerns, but it just so happened, and it wasn't a surprise. We talked about it all week leading into the game. Sometimes you talk about things and then the game doesn't play out at all the way you expect it to, and then sometimes you talk about potential issues and it's just what you thought. And I think it was just what we thought in this case. So it is a matter of South Carolina's weakness, which it is a weakness, but it's being exposed by not just their strength, but when it's a strength compared to just about every other team in the entire country. So I think the thing for South Carolina is now can they fix some of these issues? I think, like Chris said, the mental stuff is what concerns you the most. You got to clean that up. You got to continue to tweak, I think. And the question is, what is the best combination of guys? Because they keep, they start the game out, the same way they started out against Charleston Southern. McQuamu and Horn at corner, R.J. Roderick at nickel, JT Ebay, Jamias Williams at safety. As the game went along, you saw them do some mixing and matching. Jamie Robinson got in there at nickel, of course. I think he's got a bright future, but you gotta bring him along, even if that means simplifying what you do a bit. You got to bring him along mentally to keep him on the field, I think. When they did that, they had moved R.J. Roderick back up to safety alongside JT Ebay. Later in the game, they actually had Johnny Dixon in the game at cornerback, and they slid J.C. Horn over to nickelback. They got to find whether it's sliding McQuamu back to safety and playing Johnny Dixon more, whether it's playing J.C. Horn in the nickel, which is something they don't want to do, but they may have to, or whether it's just throwing Jamie Robinson back into the fire and saying, go make mistakes, but you got to get better. The kid's going to be fine. It's just a matter of bringing those young guys along maybe faster than they're ready, because I think that's probably what it's going to take to fix this thing. That said, until maybe you face Clemson later in the year, which, from a Carolina perspective, they're hoping by then some of these issues are at least shored up, that the tweaks have worked. But until then, there's probably nobody that can, expose you quite like Alabama did. And even as good as Clemson is at receiver, like Chris said, they're different receivers. And I'm not saying they're not fast, but Alabama's guys are like, they're like 6 foot, 6'1", speedster type receivers, whereas Clemson, I think, have some guys that you have your bigger, taller guys. You do have some slot type guys, but it's a little bit different array of skill sets.
To that point, and to Chris's point, I don't remember what the final number was, but the amount of passes that Alabama threw down the field was paltry, considering Tua threw 38 passes, and I think just a handful of them traveled more than 10 yards in the air. That's what Clemson's going to do a little bit differently. They're going to challenge you more vertically, and they have guys obviously like Ross that can really just go up and get it, and in the way that
And that's the issue with it. They can do a lot of different things offensively. Clemson can, but
and
that's
Amari Rodgers coming back and looking explosive in his first game, that adds a whole another element. But you're right. It is a different type of attack than Alabama. And the other point that you made that I thought was a good one, with Alabama actually putting 4 wide receivers out, people talk a lot about the spread offense, and so you think, we're just going to run 4 wide receivers, but a lot of it's still 11 personnel, and they're just splitting out the tight end. So it's actually an entirely different beast. And even with Clemson, they'll run 4 wide, but it's 11 personnel still, and it's a tight end. So the matchup problem isn't quite as dire. And so that's why I think, while it is worth talking about, and you anticipated my next question in terms of what the starting secondary will look like. Yeah, you do a great job of that. What the starting secondary will be in the Missouri game. But I think things will probably look like. I think even if Carolina doesn't actually get better, they will look better just because there aren't as many playmakers on the rest of the teams that Carolina's playing minus Clemson to sort of expose that problem. But with that being said, what is your predicted starting lineup for the secondary against Missouri?
That's something I've been efforting, as far as if there have been major changes. Before they made the offensive line changes, we got word on Sunday, hey, this was the starting group, and that held firm throughout the week and ended up being the starting group. They mix and match so much in practice that even, if you get word on what it's looked like, sometimes it's hard to tell exactly what it's going to look like on Saturday. I don't know. They've got to get better at safety. And I think ideally it's one of two things, in my opinion. Ideally, you're just rolling with Jamie Robinson at nickel, and that allows you to play RJ
at safety with
and JT Ebay at safety. Which, again, Jamie Robinson, really, really good player.
Yeah, he played well and graded out well against Alabama. He's after missing some tackles against North Carolina, I thought he had a couple good tackles in space against Bama too.
Yeah, physically, really, really good player. From what I've been told, still coming along, which you expect. He's a true freshman getting thrown into the mix, still coming along mentally as far as understanding the intricacies of the defense and everything it takes. So you're going to maybe have some busts there. But or the other option is to go back to what they did, week one, and that's play Mukuamu at safety. That allows you to sort of, play him at safety with eBay, play him at safety with RJ, and play Jamie, at nickel. I think long term, you kind of maybe want to play Jamie at safety potentially, but there's so much mentally that goes into playing safety in this scheme. I don't know if you want to put that on a freshman. So I think that option's kind of out. And that puts Johnny Dixon back in there. Do you take a harder look? Maybe if you don't feel like you have what you need at nickel yet, do you take a hard look at A.J. Turner back at nickel, still leave J.C. Horn and Mukuamu as your corners? That then frees up R.J. Roderick to stay at safety as well. I get the impression they want to keep Horn and Mukuamu. Well, they've said it. It's not just an impression. Ideal world, they want to keep Horn and Mukuamu at cornerback. Are they able to do that, though? It's one thing to want to do it. It's another thing. You got to get the best five no matter what you have to do, even if that means sliding Horn over to nickel to free up Roderick to play safety.
That seems like the least feasible option, because you can't take Horn off of whatever the other team's best receiver, because he's your best option right now. Like Mukuamu, I think hasn't even been as good as I expected him, or I expected that he was going to be this year. But the North Carolina setup, I think, is interesting, because you mentioned Israel starting at safety. If you want him at corner, that's fine. But if you're trying to figure out what to do with that other safety spot next to eBay, if you feel like Jemias isn't the guy that needs to be taking 55 snaps a game back there, have you heard anything, or do you feel like it's feasible to move Israel there? And then instead of putting John Dixon, maybe you put Jamie Robinson at that other corner. He has less to worry about, and you have R.J. Roderick stay at that nickel position.
No, I don't think Jamie. He hasn't played, I don't think, any cornerback since he got here. I think he's nickel safety all the way, so that takes that out. But, yeah, the thing that makes me think that's at least a possibility is, I rewatched the Alabama game. Late in the game, South Carolina's defense was Dixon and Mukuamu outside, Horn at nickel. So that's what makes me think that's at least a possibility. And I don't really get the sense that they travel, and I need to go back and look at it specifically. I don't really think South Carolina travels its cornerback to follow the number one receiver. It's more here's what side you're lining
playing
up
the
on.
field or the boundary.
There were a couple plays against Alabama, but I think that was I don't know. I remember there was a third down that ended up being a completion to Devontae Smith against Mukuamu, and it was Smith and Judy lined up on the left, Devontae Smith on the outside, Judy in the slot, and they put JC in that sort of like nickel on the slot on the inside, and then Mukuamu on the outside. But by and large, I don't think they do that. I think we saw even more than I expected against Alabama. But that, for me, obviously that's the biggest area of concern, because that's where Carolina got beat, because they did a really, really good job defending the run. You mentioned Alabama not salting the game away in a traditional sense, but it's because they had 25 carries and only averaged 3 yards a carry over the course of the entire game. And they had a couple like chunk plays too. Najee Harris had 2, I think, 12-yard runs, and even still, we're only able to make up 3 yards a carry. And Tua, one of the most interesting parts of the game, I thought, Tua had 0 carries. He was credited with 2 carries, but they were both sacks. He never ran the football.
And there's a lot that takes place in any game. But 2 things that popped in my head again when you were saying all that is, when your cornerbacks are up playing man coverage on these slants that go for big yardage, and I think at least on one of them, the one where J.C. Horn got beat on the slant and it ended up, the receiver crossed the safety, takes it to the house. You're in man free, which means those cornerbacks, in theory, have safety help deep.
You play inside leverage, you give them the inside release, and the safety has to help.
Your safety has got to come up and help you get that guy on the ground. That slant has to be a 10-yard completion, not a chunk play and a touchdown. And I think Carolina, it goes back to, how much of this is that those receivers were just so fast that it created bad angles. And I think South Carolina has some speed concerns at the safety position. Now, some teams can expose that better than other teams. Some teams, the proper angle, the proper film prep, just understanding where you're supposed to be, you can erase that against some team, maybe most. I don't know. We'll see. But Alabama destroys angles, basically. It's a different angle against those guys than it is against most other teams.
Yeah, but if this is rock, paper, scissors, angle beats speed. If you take the right angle, you take the speed away. And that was the exact thing that happened, the exact same thing that happened on the Ruggs touchdown. It was both safeties taking a bad angle on Ruggs, and that was what sprung him.
But sometimes that guy is just that freaking fast.
But not if you take the right angle. If we were to ask Will Muschamp right now,
there's no such thing. At some point, that guy is just too freaking fast. I think.
They also on the touchdown that Ruggs took. Will Muschamp talked about this. It's almost like prophetic, stopping their feet.
Yeah,
they're just sort of standing. They were facing Ruggs directly, basically, or maybe had a slight angle on him. And I remember there being two defenders there after they sort of crossed over Horn, and they both were just sort of flat-footed. You got, like Muschamp said, you have zero chance.
Yeah, it makes him look even faster when he's running by dudes that are standing still.
Right.
My point being maybe if he takes the perfect angle, but the margin for error is basically impossible.
Yeah, absolutely. But Earl Thomas wasn't the best safety in the NFL for 8 years because he was the fastest or even the most athletic guy on the field. It's because he was smart, because he always took good angles. He understood the geometry of the defensive backfield better than anybody in the game.
Yeah, but you're talking about an incredible safety.
Sure, but that's what you're coaching
He
for,
also redshirted at Texas, which nowadays, man, if you're not apparently, that's another thing I've learned this past week. If you were not a complete stud 10 games into your career, you're apparently a bust now. I mean, really.
Earl Thomas is a bust, at least as of
he was a bust
12 years ago or whenever he redshirted as a freshman. Anything else I wanted to get to from the Alabama game before we move into a little buy or sell as we look ahead to Missouri?
I got one thing, big picture, not about South Carolina. I left like we've already said, I thought that was the best collection of 4 receivers I've seen play in that stadium. B, as good as Tua is as a college quarterback, I got questions about him as an NFL guy. And your point about how few times they threw downfield, the few times they actually did try to go vertically, I felt like that was the second or third drive of the game when Carolina actually got pressure on Tua is because they expanded those route trees out and were actually trying to throw down the field. And that may be a positive to look moving forward for South Carolina. They were able to get pressure on Tua when they did. And that's when Alabama said, we're not doing that anymore. We're just going to – why would we? We can get our big plays from these short throws.
Yeah.
But finally, I got questions about Alabama when they play elite defenses. I think LSU – is going to give Alabama trouble this year because they may, and I don't, Carolina doesn't play LSU, so I haven't tracked their secondary. I'm just saying they're always good in the secondary. They always have athletes in the secondary. Alabama's run game not being what it has been, Alabama has to get better up front if they're going to be in the national championship game this year, because when they face truly elite teams, I think I think they could struggle. Not that they won't have a chance, but just this relying on the passing game, relying on the quick passing game.
The underneath passes and the catch and run and the yards after catch.
Yeah, Carolina.
Grant Delp is better than JT EBay and Jamias Williams.
Carolina didn't have the horses to make it matter.
LSU can play a little offense now.
And that's what I'm saying.
A little Joe Burrow action.
Joe Burrow, you can still get him at like 17-1 to win the Heisman.
I'm telling you, I think they got a new passing game guy at
Joe
LSU.
Brady.
Joe Brady from the Saints.
Yeah, from the Saints.
Smart dude.
Dude, I'm telling you, I left thinking LSU. This may be their chance.
Before the Alabama game was even over, I had checked to see what week the Alabama LSU game is, and it's the week of the Carolina App State game. Because if that was, I mean, I guess it doesn't really matter what game it is. If that game's at the same time, I know what game I'm recording and watching later. Spoiler. I'm really excited about that Alabama LSU game. I think that's going to be
Bama
awesome.
by 17.
Your other point,
Yes. Bama by 17.
Will you give me those odds? You give me that line?
Ooh. I don't bet.
And the other thing that you said about Tua, I think, is really interesting. I kind of kept that opinion to myself. I maybe voiced it to a couple of people, but I left that game thinking, are people really tanking for Tua? Like, is that as sure thing as tanking for Andrew Luck or? I mean, even Trevor Lawrence, who's 4 touchdowns, 5 interceptions through 3 games this season.
Yeah,
I kind of thought the same thing. He skipped a pass There was it was Judy running down the field, and it looked like reasonably well covered, but he threw it about 10 yards short of him. It was like a nooner pass, and I was like, what was that? I didn't know if he was just throwing it in the dirt.
That was weird. But most of his passes were on the money, though. Even
I mean,
easier.
He makes some great passes, but anything further or anything farther than 10 yards down the field seems like less of a sure thing. But I guess that's neither here nor there.
All right, and we got to get back on track, I think. But I said this to Chris. I don't think I've said it like you said. I don't think I've said it publicly. But if we're in an alternate universe, if Ryan Helinski is on the other sideline, he makes every single throw that Tua made, I think.
Sure. Yeah.
I think he puts up the same numbers. We're talking about the same performance, which that's a true freshman, which I don't know if that says – I don't know what that says about
switch
either guy.
the quarterbacks. How different is the result?
In that game, about the same.
Yeah.
In other games in the past, not the same.
No, for sure.
But in this game, because of how the offense was structured, the play calls and all that, I mean, Ryan could have made all those throws, and there wasn't a lot of pressure at most times because he's getting the ball out quick.
Right, both of those guys. I mean, they were running similar kinds of offense. Helinski threw the ball down the field a couple times. He missed Brian long. He threw the touchdown pass to Shy, and then he threw the pick to Shy. But that's one that you almost, I mean, you don't wipe out because it was not a good decision. He had Xavier Legette open over the middle of the field, and he could have made a better decision there, but it's late in the game. You're just trying to make up. I think at that point it was still a 3-score game, so
you have to force stuff.
Yeah, you're kind of pressing, you're kind of forcing. So that one doesn't concern me overly. The last thing that I wanted to mention before we get into a little bit of buy or sell, because you mentioned Alabama going down the field and not only Tua not necessarily connecting on those throws, maybe we're overreacting. I was just looking for an angle on that really while I was watching the game, but it did kind of stand out. But Carolina's ability to get pressure was interesting, and something that Eric Kimry pointed out on my local show on 107.5 on Monday. It's not just that Carolina was getting pressure where Alabama was weak, which is that sort of interior line, which Alabama fans have been complaining about all season long. And, I mean, you saw that. You give credit to Carolina's interior defensive line, but you also take into consideration this is not Alabama's best interior offensive line, and that both of those things, I think, contribute to Alabama not being able to run the ball. But Carolina getting pressure, off the edge, I think it was Dylan Wanham and Javon Kinlaw that were credited for that sack, so kind of a combo there. But Carolina's ability to get pressure, even against an Alabama offensive line that's got a couple of good tackles, I think that's something else to be encouraged about that hasn't been talked about a ton lately. All right, time for a little buy or sell. Shout out to the Terry Bishop team for sponsoring what has become one of our favorite segments and one that has been very divisive. People like to track our picks and remind us when we're wrong, which is great because that's why we put this out into the public sphere last week. I think it was Chris and I bought 125 yards rushing. Carolina finished with 135, so we were right. Wes was wrong. I think Wes and I bought that Carolina would score over 25 points.
On the points.
And Chris did not. Wes and I were wrong. Chris was right. And the last one, because it was only 24 or 20. It was 47 to 23. Yeah, so 24-point game. So we barely missed that.
I'm not very good at this.
Yeah, it's all right. I'm not very good at this either. But in the last one was, what was the last one?
It was actually not something we could really track because it was your.
It was Kinlaw.
Your Kinlaw.
It was
thing.
Kinlaw. Yeah, and I think I win.
I don't think you did.
Yeah,
but
I bought that Kinlaw was the most important player in the game. Y'all sold it. Yeah, that's impossible to track.
Yeah, although I will say, and I said Ryan Helinski was the most important guy in the game, which
I agreed with
Kinlaw
that.
was a beast, though.
I will say, time to give Javon Kinlaw his due because I think some people sort of have this feeling that he didn't play all that great last year, and I thought for an interior defensive tackle, I thought he actually. Now he had some games where he was dominant, some games where he just sort of did what he was supposed to do, but that's a position you're not going to just mash the other guy in front of you every single game. There's to me, the guy is closing in on a really, really good senior season. I mean, there were times even against Alabama's guys, like you said, maybe they're not quite as strong on the interior as they have been in the past, but still, this is Alabama. They recruit 4 or 5-star guys in there.
And Chris Owens was playing. He was the guy that was questionable headed into the week. He is their starting center, according to their preseason depth chart. He's the best guy they have there. So that was a big get for Alabama, and frankly didn't make that much of a difference in terms of Alabama being able to block the run any better or even protect Tua in that first quarter.
Yes, I like Javon. I think he graded out maybe best of the defenders last year, just the entire season. and graded out well this week too. So Javon,
third straight 70-plus game, according to Pro Football Focus.
Yeah, huge part of what they do.
All right, buy or sell. Chris, you want to tell us a little bit about the Bishop team?
Yeah, Terry Bishop, former Gamecock quarterback, big supporter of the program, 36 years of real estate experience right here in Columbia. He's got a cockaboose for sale right now for a really good deal, I've been told. And if you want to buy, sell, invest in real estate, he's an obvious choice. He knows what he's doing. He's a Gamecock guy. So give him a call, 803-665-1442, and visit on Facebook, facebook.com/The Terry Bishop Team.
All right. First up on our buy or sell, South Carolina traveling to Columbia, Missouri, where they're a 9.5-point underdog. A lot of question marks, as we've talked about, remain about South Carolina's safeties. They just gave up a lot of points and a lot of yards to Alabama. Certainly a different beast here in Missouri with the quarterback in Kelly Bryant, who still has a lot to prove. But we'll start on the defensive side of the ball and say buy or sell. Carolina will hold Missouri to fewer than 35 points. Chris, you start.
I will buy that.
You're buying that Carolina will hold Missouri to fewer than 35.
Yep. You sound incredulous almost.
No, I just want to make sure because you pretty much sell everything. I'm not used to you starting things off with a buy. So for you, does that have more to do with Carolina making some either personnel changes or just some market improvement in the film room and the approach on the back end of the secondary, or do you just not think that this Missouri team is equipped offensively to put up those kinds of numbers against Carolina?
Oh, I think Missouri's going to put up some. I think they're going to put up some yardage. I think they're going to put up some numbers. It's a little bit like last week with the rushing total. I said that South Carolina would go over, but not by much. And
you're right, 10 yards.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm not patting myself on the back. I may not be right very often. Thank you. But with Missouri, I mean, 35 points is the threshold. I see them getting, right at it or very close. To be honest with you, I think Kelly Bryant, with what he can do as a dual threat guy. They have receivers who can really run, whether it's Jonathan Johnson or Nance. Larry Roundtree's a really good back. And they got a pretty big and pretty solid offensive line as well. And then Albert O at tight end obviously is a weapon. So I certainly think that they're going to put up some points. I'm just going to sort of, I guess, follow my gut and say that I will buy them going under. I just think maybe, one thing would be a spoiler, so I'll leave out that reason.
All right, Wes, buy or sell?
Buy.
I'm going to buy it too. Alabama got to 47. One of those was garbage time, and so it was essentially 40 when the game was in the balance, and Alabama was a lot more talented offensively. I'll be really curious to see if the pass rush that Carolina was able to get early in the game is sustainable. I think Kelly Bryant, even though he's a mobile guy, I think is not as accurate, especially in the short and intermediate game, as Tua. So if they can get some pressure on him, I can see him making some mistakes. And, I guess I have also a stat that would be a spoiler for our next buy or sell. So I'm going to hold off on that. And we're all buying that. That's cool. Good job, us. Next up, buy or sell. Rico Dowdle will have his second straight 100-plus yard rushing game in conference.
I'm buying it as well. Full disclosure, I was going to look up Missouri's defensive numbers before I answered that. You got it?
Yep.
Okay.
I was going to say, you've been typing on your computer this entire time, not paying attention to anything Chris or I have said, and
I've been doing
find
work.
The stats?
Yeah, I had to.
We're working right now.
I had to do something for our later segment. What, you got the stats?
But not this later
I have
segment.
the team stats. Yes, that they've given
although,
up.
which I got to say, I hate team stats this time of year.
Yeah.
They
This is
suck.
West Virginia, Southeast Missouri State, and who else has Missouri played?
Wyoming.
Wyoming at altitude, which Muschamp mentioned was brutal.
And I think the sack totals are counted in these that I have as well, which I don't know what the sack numbers were, but Missouri, do you want me to give them?
Yes, please.
Okay. Missouri gave up 297 rushing yards to Wyoming. Their running back and their quarterback, Wyoming, went over 100 yards, both of those guys each in that game. I botched that. Each of them went over 100 yards. Okay, there we go. And then West Virginia only had 30
What the
rushing yards. That's sort of rough. West Virginia, Neil Brown, star in coaching. West Virginia not too good this year.
Weird season for them.
Weird
Didn't they
season.
turn around and beat NC State?
Yeah,
didn't they?
Yeah, and they were
Beat the
an
heck out of
underdog
them.
in that game.
Yeah.
Weird
So
season
weird
for West
game.
Virginia.
40 rushing yards to Southeast Missouri State, who's not very good at all. So
that's basically FCS Southeast. Like that's almost even the name of their school. Which I mean, you play NCAA football.
Yeah, right. So it's sort of hard to figure out. You don't take anything away from Southeast Missouri State rushing total. It could be 400 or if it's 400, that'd be bad. Whatever number, you don't really take away much from it. But then you've got like Wyoming, almost 300 yards.
But they
that's
breathe.
bad.
They couldn't breathe. They're at altitude.
And then you've got West
part.
Virginia. Right,
Yeah.
they couldn't breathe. And so, but then you get West Virginia, and it's 30, and you're like, well, that's really good. And West Virginia, I mean, th're not great, but maybe they're not horrible. So I don't know.
I'll say this, and I'm still going to buy whatever. I'm buying only because of the guy on South Carolina's side, and that Rico Dowdle looks outstanding. I mean, one of those plays that was like either, and I can't remember, it was like an outside zone or sweep, pin and pull sweep, something like that. I can't remember what exact play it was. Anyway, it's designed to go outside, and the hole opened up on the inside, and Dowdle just stuck his foot in the ground and just exploded. He didn't just see the hole, he exploded through it, and then getting the extra yardage downfield where he's weaving back and forth and running hard, running through tackles, has caught the ball well.
He knocked
that
on
was
wood.
Wes
Couldn't hear
knocking
that.
on the
Yeah.
wooden table.
I did that for Rico. He's caught the ball well out of the backfield. Rico has maybe been the best player on offense through 3 games.
The down around
He
scheme.
was
Is that what
actually-
you're talking about, Wes? Last champ terminology.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Down around scheme.
Yeah, I can't remember exactly what the call was. I just know it was an outside run. He's been
I think that was
really
what
good.
what Eric Kimry said they call a smart pull, where basically they have the option to pull the center and the guard depending on where the rest of the defense is aligning.
Yeah.
So in that instance, they pulled both of them. But you're right, he cut it up like inside of the right guard, and I've never seen him like not even his freshman year. I don't remember that. That was many years ago now. But the point about his health is so important, and I've never seen him seek out contact like he does now. There was a play, it was sort of late in the game, and he caught just like a little dump off maybe 5 yards down the field, and Alabama had like a backup corner in, but he went and he just wrecked that dude on the sideline. And it's amazing to watch him run so violently. So I'm going to buy it as well. Rico's been fantastic. Fun fact, though, courtesy of Will Helms, courtesy of PFF, he was actually number 3, or the 3rd highest graded out player on offense for South Carolina, behind Brian Edwards, number 1, actually behind Tavian Feaster, too, which I thought was curious, who only had 36 yards rushing, 33 yards rushing.
For Saturday's game?
For Saturday's game,
Yeah, but I'm saying he's probably the highest graded for the season.
Yeah, I would imagine so.
At least among starters.
So we're both buying.
Yeah.
Chris, are we going to go 2 for 2, all buying?
I'm gonna sell it.
Just because we bought it?
No.
Oh, really?
I mean, I think he can get there. I think.
So you don't think he's
I'm
as
gonna
good
do
as
the thing
Wyoming's running
again.
back?
Well, I'm gonna do the thing again where I'm gonna say he gets very close, but not there. And
he has to say that every time.
I have another reason.
Okay.
Well, no, because you could say, well, he's only gonna have 30. That's not close.
Chris is predicting he will have 98 yards.
Yeah, I think 99. No, I think he'll have like 80, 90. And I'm picking Tavian Feaster to have a little bit of a bigger game this time.
Okay.
I think he's going to have maybe a couple longer runs in the game, Feaster. So that is why
What
he's
makes
going to
you say that?
steal just all my scheme study. No. I mean, I think Feaster's due for a couple longer runs, right? He has not.
And
he showed it in
some of
North
that
Carolina.
burst, but
Yeah.
just not consistently.
When he just hasn't had against Alabama for
Fucking
whatever
room.
reason, didn't have as much room. And we've seen that in a few other games, even against North Carolina. Like, he had the big run, but just for whatever reason, it might just be dumb luck. He just hasn't had the space. So I feel like he might get it in this game, maybe even in the passing game too. But I think Feaster will have a couple bigger runs and maybe just steal some of that yardage from Rico.
When,
That's a good take.
I'm already waiting on the text I'm going to get after
he
Tavian
has
breaks
a
off a
60-yard
50-yarder.
touchdown?
Yeah.
Yes.
Cool.
Last time they were in Missouri, Tyson Williams had maybe his best long run of his career.
That was,
I thought of that.
I think, the first of 2 instances of him hurdling a person, which was cool. If I remember correctly. That might have been the Texas A&M game. I don't exactly remember. I thought it was Missouri. But either way, that was cool. And I will always remember that. And I will always appreciate Tyson for doing that. All right, last up. South Carolina. This is my stat that I was saving from earlier. This is courtesy of my roommate Joe, who texted me this morning, efforted it afterwards.
Big Joe.
Carolina
Joseph.
has not had an interception against an FBS opponent since the Missouri game last year. Buy or sell, South Carolina can only get interceptions against Missouri. No, buy or sell, South Carolina will end that streak also against Missouri and will record at least one interception this weekend.
It seems like the percentages are against this, but
or in favor of it because it's been so long. Like statistically, they should have had a pick by now, right?
Yeah,
should have had one in the North Carolina game.
That's not really a true thing, though. The whole they're due. That's not really. That doesn't statistically hold up.
There's a 50-50 chance either it'll happen or it won't.
I'm gonna say yes. I'm gonna say there's a tipped ball that somehow ends up in a South Carolina player's hands.
That's
and
very specific.
They hold on to it.
All right, Chris.
We'll say they're almost going to. No, I'm just kidding. I'm not going to do that.
They're going to pick it off. It's going to get overturned by review.
They're going to
yeah. They'll drop out of their hands. I'm going to let's see. How do I do it? Buy that they will have an interception.
Man, I'm buying too. So you're the only person that has sold anything, and it was Rico going for 100 yards, which frankly I feel like is the most likely of the three things that we talked about. I think so too, though. I just think Kelly Bryant. I think Kelly Bryant might be, other than Charleston Southern, which again doesn't count because it was an FCS opponent for this stat. I mean, because this is a streak against FBS opponents. Carolina did have 3 interceptions in that game, and Kelly Bryant is less accurate than Tua and less accurate than I think Sam Howell was on that day. Obviously, we've only seen 3 games of Sam Howell. Didn't play particularly well against Wake Forest in North Carolina's first loss of the season. That was, I guess, was that last Thursday or last Friday? Last Friday, right? That was weird. So I don't know. I feel like there was more opportunity. Tua doesn't throw a lot of picks, so I'm going to say bye. Chris.
Random. I was just thinking about Drew Lock, and
how
Drew
overrated he is.
You randomly think about Drew Lock?
In this conversation, not normally.
So not totally random.
But he, South Carolina sort of tormented him because he would have a lot of really good games, and you remember
against Southeastern Missouri State kinds of teams. He had one good game against Georgia in his career, and now people regret drafting him. Where's he in Denver?
Denver.
Yeah.
So Drew Lock had a really good game against a pretty bad 3-win South Carolina team, as a true freshman, and it really helped put him on the map, right? I mean, it was a really good game. That game he had 75% completions, which we all remember the Georgia game that year. And then he had 2 touchdowns, no interceptions. Grayson Lambert. 2 touchdowns, no interceptions. But after that, I was just thinking that in terms of South Carolina, for whatever reason, always had a lot of success against Drew Lock, so they're going to need to sort of rekindle some of that.
Yeah,
Two guys have nothing to do with each other, but whatever.
All right, well, let's continue this sidebar briefly before we wrap up buy or sell.
Yes, just real quick, I want to give Drew's stats.
Hit me.
The next games, 57%, 1 touchdown, 2 interceptions. The next year, 43%, 1 touchdown, 2 interceptions. And then last season, 47%, no touchdowns, 2 interceptions. Wow. So Drew was he was pretty brutal those last 3 years against the Gamecocks, for whatever reason.
Is he the best empty stats quarterback of the decade?
I couldn't say. I haven't seen all of them.
Let's just say let's just say in the Southeastern Conference. Would you rather have Drew Lock or Jake Bentley?
I mean, I would pick Bentley. Yep.
The real question is, would you pick Bentley?
Yeah.
Why is that the real question?
We all know why.
No, I think both of those guys have recorded a lot of empty statistics. I think Drew Lock's probably the king of empty stats. So if I want to put up 730 points against Southeastern Missouri State and FCS Southeast, I'm taking Drew Lock. There's nobody better to just torch an absolutely horrible team and then not.
That is true. He was very good at that. Very adept.
Fantastic at that. Yeah. And I guess you give the coaching staff credit too for just running it up like that.
You mentioned a lot of Drew Lock's stats. What do y'all remember? Do y'all remember what Kelly Bryant's stats were against South Carolina? His lone start against the Gamecocks.
Yes.
What do you remember about
that? He didn't throw down the field very much. He was 23 of 32 for 246 yards, 2 touchdowns, and no interceptions.
How many completions did you say?
23. Was that right?
23, yes. Of 34.
What did I say, 32?
Yeah.
Dude, I'm pulling this straight out of my ass.
No, we're explicit now. for 272 yards.
I said 240-something.
Yep.
2 touchdowns and no
2
picks?
touchdowns, one
pick?
interception. Yeah.
Oh, my gosh. Wow. All right.
That's
pretty good. But
which is probably his line about every game he
Mhm.
started for them, except for maybe Alabama.
Yep. And then when
But
you look
yeah.
at his stats, it's like passes thrown down the field is like, and however many years he's been playing football, it's like 0 of 1.
Yeah, well,
Probably
the
his
thing
stats.
I remember, and maybe it's my perception, the thing I remember about Kelly Bryant, he could throw the deep ball when we're talking, like the go route, basically, like lob it up, my guy runs under it. He can throw the short stuff, tons of screens. I remember that team. It seemed like wide receiver screen left, wide receiver
Well, it was
screen
like
right.
who hired Chad Morris?
Yeah, a different, different version of a wide receiver screen, just all this stuff. The thing that I always thought he sort of struggled with was like the intermediate throws where you're reading, you're dropping the ball in behind linebackers, you're throwing the ball in windows. That's what I felt like, at least at Clemson, that he didn't really do a whole lot of. Now, they haven't ran him very much at Missouri. And, I believe Barry Odom was asked about that and basically said that, they know what's ahead as far as the schedule is. So I think it was more, let's save that in the back pocket. Now, that said, you lost to Wyoming. Maybe you should have ran him a little bit more in that game, but
Maybe he was deprived of oxygen too, like the rest of the
could
defense.
be. That to me is very interesting how few times he's run the football this year compared to, he was Clemson's second leading rusher, I think, the year he started there, and rushed for, I think, maybe 600 and something yards or so. So
I thought it was more than that, but yeah, he rushed
600,
a lot.
700, something like that. He ran the football, and that obviously takes out sacks. So his actual rushing total without sacks
Probably closer to 800 or 900.
is a lot higher.
Yeah.
So that's been interesting to me. Does that continue, or do they try to run him, a bit more this week now that you're in SEC play? And what does South Carolina sort of have to do to stop that?
That's the question. Is what can Kelly Bryant do? And we'll, I guess, transition into a little bit of Missouri preview. That was buy or sell. Reminder, we all bought everything except Chris sold Rico Dowdle rushing
Sorry,
for
Rico.
100 yards
Chris
because
does
he
not
thinks
believe
it's
in
going to be
you.
a Tavian Feaster breakout game from one Clemson transfer against another. It's going to be Tavian who wins the day, not Kelly Bryant, at least in Chris's opinion. So thanks again to the Bishop team for sponsoring that segment. We talked a little bit about what some of the secondary changes might look like. Talked about, again, sort of those angles in buy or sell. How do y'all see this game going? The line opened at 9.5. That was on Sunday night or maybe Monday morning. We just checked, and it hasn't crept down at all. And it's still minus 110 on each side, which means the action through the early part of the week has been very even on both sides. That seems high to me.
Me too.
Yeah.
I think the teams are pretty even.
Very even.
I thought you would
Yeah.
give Missouri, and I don't really know about the gambling lines and how all that works. I don't know the intricacies of it all, but I felt like it maybe opened Missouri like favored by around 5 or so.
Yeah,
like,
I said
at
4,
home,
4.5.
Yeah. At home, and if it was in this Columbia, I felt like it had been, right around a pick 'em. Maybe Missouri still favored a little bit, but I thought just with them being home, that was maybe the big difference between the two teams right now. You do have a freshman quarterback starting on the road for the first time. I don't know how much that plays into the Vegas stuff, but yeah, dude, I was floored. Like, not just that's weird. I was shocked that it was as high as it is. And this, as far as how it plays out, this is a fourth quarter game all the way. I think. I think for South Carolina, most of the time teams don't play that well after they play Alabama. It seems like some of that is that they're so banged up, and South Carolina did. As bad as the injury bug was for them last year, they have, for the most part, you're always going to have guys that are hurt, but for the most part, they survived the Alabama game without having an injury list of 10 guys.
I mean, no new injuries. The only Carolinas carrying into the Missouri game are Brad Johnson, Drake Davis, Keir Thomas, and A.J. Turner, maybe, all of whom have already been missing time with injuries.
Yeah, so you feel better about that. We didn't do buy or sell on the line, but I'm taking South Carolina all the way with the 9.5 points. I mean, that's something where I feel pretty strongly that it's going to be closer than that. As far as how it plays out, I think South Carolina can keep scoring on these guys. Obviously, the question is, does the road atmosphere affect Ryan Helinski? I don't really think of Missouri as being some crazy, tough-to-play SEC atmosphere. As far as much like we said, it was very, very nice for Ryan Helinski to start his career against Charleston Southern at home. If you were going to pick a stadium to have your first road SEC game,
Vanderbilt.
other than Vanderbilt,
Yeah.
Missouri is it.
Yeah.
All the other ones are like true SEC big-time atmospheres. Columbia, Missouri can get loud-ish, but it's not like just that, oh my gosh, there's 100,000 people. This is the most intimidating thing I've ever done.
No. The only thing you worry about is it's really far. It's a different time. It's a lot of travel. And, I mean, that's what you worry about more than anything else because in terms of football, I mean, what defense is Ryan going to see that's more fearsome than that Alabama defense this year?
Not many.
Like maybe none, maybe
Georgia.
one. Yeah, Georgia you put in there,
Clemson.
maybe.
They'll move around a lot.
Clemson you put in there, maybe.
They're
But
pretty
Clemson
good.
for me still has some question marks in their front seven. Like they've looked good, but they haven't looked dominant, at least not compared to last year, which is, I mean, that's a given. When you lose when you lose 6 of your front 7 to the NFL, like it's going to be hard to replace that. But in terms of the actual football, it wasn't going to be what he faced with Alabama last week. It's really just how does the travel affect?
Yeah, what am I missing here as far as the line? Just the
see,
fact
that's what I
South
don't
Carolina
know.
lost to North Carolina.
Carolina's 1-2, Missouri's 2-1. I think your point about a freshman quarterback making his first start on the road is well taken. I think Vegas sees that. But if we're all thinking that line is a little bit high, that this game will be decided in the fourth quarter, Chris, is this a last offense that has the ball wins kind of game, or is it going to come down to someone making a stop at the end? I know that's like semantics.
That would be wouldn't that be the same thing?
Well, no. I mean, is this going to be
like does South Carolina need to score on the last drive, or
is the game going to be decided by the
Yeah.
someone scoring on the last drive, or is it going to be kind
like
of
a field goal as
stops
time
late?
expires,
or even just it's a Hail Mary or an interception at the 20-yard line or something?
No, I could certainly see that a last drive stop, either got to score or got to get a stop. I could see that for sure. I think it is close. I think it's a one-score game either way. A couple really evenly matched teams, sort of when you look at how the personnel is playing. I think if you look at the roster, just as far as like the star power, shameless plug, we got that on Gamecock Central right now, as far as the recruiting rankings and all that. I think South Carolina would have that on paper edge as far as that. But Missouri, I mean, somehow or another, they always come up with some guys who are really good football players who are unheralded. They got a lot of them on the roster. So they still have talent, too, like Roundtree. I mean, Bryant's going to present some problems. Defensively, they got some guys like Jordan Elliott and DeMarcus Acey who are really good players. So I think it's close either way, and I agree. Last, it's going to be something you're tracking up until the clock hits 0. I don't think anybody's going to be out so far ahead that the game's in hand in the fourth quarter.
I'd be really curious to see how the rushing attack for Missouri fares, because Carolina has defended the run well the last couple of games, especially against Alabama. That's obviously tremendous in terms of how optimistic you are, but Tua didn't run it. He did not have a rushing attempt that wasn't a sack. So how much, like you were talking about, Wes, how much do they take Kelly Bryant out of the garage for a spin, let him run the ball more than he has this year? If they don't, I feel like Carolina's got a pretty good chance of making this offense one-dimensional. Roundtree's a good running back, but I mean, they've had Demaria Crockett for the last couple of years, who was really, really good. I mean, he plays for the Oakland Raiders right now. Roundtree's a good back, but he's not, Demaria Crockett. And Crockett, even in particular, we're talking about Drew Lock having uncharacteristically bad games for Carolina. It always seemed like Crockett had a little bit extra for that Carolina game for whatever reason. So it is going to be a little bit easier. And you think Carolina's defensive line, I think their linebackers have gotten a lot better from last year to this year. So I think we all bought the under for 35 points for Missouri. I could see this being a 31-28 kind of game, with it, sort of coming down to, can Carolina make Missouri one-dimensional, and can they get a stop sort of at the end of the game rather than just scoring a bunch and winning maybe in a shootout, would be my take on how this plays out.
I agree. And, I think that this, and maybe it's still going back to what I thought preseason, and that I'm still hoping I was right, as opposed to dead wrong about this defense. I had pretty high expectations for what this defense could be. We've seen what the weaknesses are, and I think if you're sort of looking at the entirety of the season so far, you're saying, all right, this team really struggled to tackle against North Carolina. There were issues, as we've talked about, against Alabama, and the one team they sort of played well defensively against was a team that just didn't have a chance. So you're saying these issues are what they are at this point. The other side of that could be, though, that one game was against Alabama, the best collection of speed you're going to see at wide receiver. The first game was game one, which you always have more tackling issues like that on defense in game one than you ever do.
And with the exception of 2 drives, like I'm rejecting the narrative that was an abject disaster for Carolina defensively. They gave up 24 points. They gave up a lot of yards. But 24, if you give up, I said this like right after the North Carolina game, if you give up 24 points a game over the course of an entire season, you're one of the best defenses in the country. It was 2 bad drives. They were both horrible. Lots of missed tackles, busted coverages, the whole 9 yards. But 2 bad drives does not a bad defense make.
Yep, and just the fact that they were, not that Alabama has been a great running team so far, but the fact they were able to stand in there and hold up against the run against Alabama, I think this defense is a little bit better than what the perception is of them right now, and I think we'll start to see that in what I believe are the 2 biggest games of the year, the next 2 weeks, and arguably the next 2 weeks are the biggest stretch of the Will Muschamp era to this point.
I could not agree more. All right, we're running a little bit short on time here. Y'all did a quick kind of, what'd y'all call it? I like the name.
The No Huddle edition?
Was that what you called it? Yeah, the No Huddle, the Rico Powers, like emergency.
Oh, yeah.
Commit cast.
So we did, Monday we did the No Huddle, another Carolina podcast, which is our quick thoughts on
ACP.
the game. Yeah, the No Huddle ACP. Then we did the Commit Cast, which we're going to try to do those every time on Rico Powers, 4-star commitment out of Georgia.
Yeah, so I wanted to get to him today. We're running short on time. We're already running a little bit long here, but y'all go check out the Commit Cast if y'all want to hear a little bit more about Rico Powers, about what kind of player Carolina got, because Will Muschamp cannot talk about that, as one USC student found out the hard way yesterday at his press conference, which was kind of a funny moment. Probably stressful for Will, because he's just like, oh no, I'm going to get in trouble. But it was funny for the rest of us, I think. But anyway, go check that out. You can get that on the Gamecock Central podcast feed. But before we get out of here, got to go back over the Schlotzsky's winners from this past week. So I'll let you explain the game, and also since it's Wednesday, I do have a couple days to go ahead and make your official predictions for the Carolina-Missouri game, so that you have an opportunity to win some Schlotzsky's.
Yeah, you got plenty of time. Schlotzsky's Deli Pick'em there on. It's both on the Insiders Forum and the Fighting Gamecocks Forum, which means you don't actually have to be a subscriber to participate. The closest to the score of the game will get basically a $60 tailgating package, which involves your pick of sandwiches. You get some chips, all the other stuff you need, like your plates and your napkins and all that stuff, some cookies, which is, I think, Pearson's favorite part, all from Schlotzsky's Deli. And we had someone actually last week pick the game within 1 point.
Was it me?
It was not
my
you.
pick was money. I said 49-24. It was 47-23.
They said 48-23.
Oh, wow, that's strong.
Right, that is money. And I will be sending out, once they get me their mailing address, I will be sending out their package there. And I believe we're all going to get some Schlotzsky's today. So
I'm ready.
Yeah,
you mentioned the cookies, my favorite part. That is not an unfair characterization, but I mean, their sandwiches are legendary. It's like it's like picking one of your favorite kids, you know? I can't say if I like the sandwich more than the cookie. I just like them both so much.
Cassero 9 was our winner, by the way. Cassero 9.
Nice job, Cassero.
Yes.
1 point. That's really impressive.
Yep. So, and again, you got plenty of time to get in there right now. I did want to mention real quick about the game. How weird is it? Like, you've got, for it to be a South Carolina Missouri game, you've got some like weird sort of off the field storylines in this game. In
two
that
Clemson transfers,
two Clemson
the
transfers. Kyle Markway being from Missouri, and he's had a very strange career against Missouri. He was injured a couple years ago against Missouri. He had, and it ended up being a serious injury. He had the catch that sets up the game-winning field goal last year. Now he's going back to Missouri. He's going to have like 70 friends and family in the stands, which there may be as many Markway fans in the stands as there are Missouri fans in the stands. Nice. So, you know, that's pretty cool, the different, you know, and you have actually Jay Urich is really, really good friends. They're both former Wren quarterbacks with Kelly Bryant. And shout out to Ramon Robinson. He's sort of the private quarterback coach for both those guys. So you've got some just, for it to be a Missouri-South Carolina game, there's a lot of just sort of interesting outside the sidelines little storylines.
Yeah, it should be a fun game, and I hope that everyone around Columbia is in as good a mood as they are on this Wednesday. But like I said, you have a couple days if you want to make predictions, if you want to factor in some of those outside storylines into how you think this game is going to go. You're welcome to do so. If you're not a subscriber to Gamecock Central, you can find that thread on the Fighting Gamecock forum. Thanks so much to Slotchkeys for supporting the podcast and for helping people have awesome tailgates. And this is also the first true away game, so a great opportunity to get all the sandwiches, bring them over to your house, have a bunch of people over, and just share the goodness. And by the way, if you're not a subscriber to Gamecock Central and you want to play the Slotchkeys Challenge on the Insiders Forum, you can do that for a month for free by just entering the code GCPOD, and that'll get you a month of insider access for free, which is fantastic. Thank you all so much for listening. Don't forget to check out, as I mentioned, the Commit Cast on Rico Powers. If y'all missed the No Huddle, Another Carolina podcast on Monday, or the Get Cocky podcast, go listen to both of those. We'll be back with another episode of the Get Cocky podcast on Friday. Until then, y'all have a good week. For Chris, for Wes, I'm Pearson Fowler. We'll talk to you next Wednesday.